Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm hoping to share with you some of my thoughts. Do I really need this? Right? Okay. I'm hoping to share some of my thoughts with you on why resilience is so important, in particularly in this century, which is so changing and which has had probably in its very few years more change than in any other time in the world. And I suppose the last time we had such violence in change might have been the Industrial Revolution, which dislocated the world from farming into towns. We're now constantly in flux with technology, and as always, socially we're not able to keep up with it. And so it causes much disturbance, much confusion, and many problems. And certainly in young people, and not only in young people but in other people also, there are many mental health issues that are the result of the difficulties they experience in problem solving, in having the resilience of knowing how to deal with the adversities in life, which, as we all know, are inevitable. No human being is ever going to manage to get through life without some sort of adversity. And resilience, I was very, very lucky to meet Edith Grotberg in one of the International Council of Psychology's conferences in the early 90s in Europe. And I was very struck by her work. She had researched 32 countries with over 1,200 families in Africa, Asia, Europe, both the Americas and Australia, to look at what were the factors in resilience. How did we become resilient? Were people born resilient? And what she learned is that nobody is born resilient. Resilience is learnt. It's a set of skills that anybody at any stage can learn. So I became very interested, and Edith became my mentor and very, very dear friend. And she died a few years ago, and I've sort of carried, well, she used to call me atta girl, American obviously, atta girl, and you just get on with it, and you just do it, and you just keep doing it. And you just pass it on and make other people do it. So the atta girl attitude has stayed with me. And I just see this as a very effective way of helping young people to grow into competent, compassionate and community-minded people. Because this is what we need. We need a society that has a sense of community and that it has compassion for each other. But first and foremost, I would like young people to be competent, because then they can use these other two characteristics so well. So I would like to just show you how this model works, and if I may, I will start with the first one. If I take the developmental approach, when a child is conceived, three developmental clocks start to tick: a physical, an intellectual and an emotional. And those clocks are really set by genetic time, they're not chronological time. And they often tick at different stages. Well, we've all seen that. We see children grow at different rates, we see children with different levels of intelligence. And the one we don't see very easily, of course, is the emotional clock, because where are emotions? Emotions are internal, usually the result of the amygdala in the brain working, the old brain. You know, the old part of the old brain is what? The amygdala is what? 4 million years old, something like that. And our frontal cortex, our thinking, problem-solving, executive brain is only about 40,000 years old. So the amygdala, which is the instinctive animal brain, the survival brain, of course, is much older and therefore probably much more powerful and needs mediation, does it not, from the intellectual part. And that's what children find very hard, and particularly young children, and the other lot that find it very hard are adolescents, who are really young children in big bodies. Now these developmental clocks, of course, operate in the environment and are moderated, infected and affected by the environment. And also now we know, in the last maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years, with brain plasticity, that there are many more things the brain can do than we thought. When I studied psychology, I was told that, you know, if there was brain damage, that was it. Bad luck, you're gone. And the fact that the brain grew until you were 25 and then it was set and that was it again. Well, of course, we know that it can change till the minute before you die. So there's a lot of opportunity for everybody forever. Well, until they, as one of my patients says, when are you going to cark it, Judy? I said, not just yet. He said, well, that's good. So, and of course, the things that influence these developmental clocks are, of course, the parents, the home, then which is the first community that the child is in, is it not? So the child learns to become part of the home and then goes to preschool and school and learns a larger community, and then eventually in the world in which he or she lives. We all know Maslow's needs, and Edith and I decided that resilience might have been one of those needs. We say that resilience is the ability to face, overcome, manage, and sometimes even be transformed by adversity, and that we need to help people from very early on to develop resilience, to learn those skills. And the skills are the I have, and this is Edith's genius, she put it down to I have, I am, and I can. The I have are the external supports that allow one's I ams, one's internal personal strengths to develop, so that their social, interpersonal and problem-solving skills can become active. Children need an I have person until probably they're in double figures. And then they can start being I haves for each other, because I'll tell you why in a few moments. But initially you have to have an I have person, and we all know that every relationship that we've ever had and will ever have is predicated on trust. And trust is the underlying factor for resilience. If you don't trust, you'll never become resilient. Trust, and those of you who know Erikson's stages, if we look at the child's development, the child goes through the first thing the child learns. Trust is, what does the child learn? When we bring a baby home, you know, as I used to say, it leaks at both ends. And does it not leak at both ends? And at most inconvenient times. What does the child learn? When I squawk, when I cry, one of these big things comes and makes me feel nice. And ultimately, the big thing coming and making me feel nice ends in me trusting these big things, one of these big things, and out of that actually love forms. Out of that relationship, love forms. So it's the bedrock upon which every relationship is based. So if we look at this model then, and if we may have the next slide, please. I've got to the stage, I remember if I'm allowed to make an aside, some years ago I had to introduce Zelman Khan as the guest speaker at a conference we were running. And Zelman was then in his 80s, and he, walked up to the stage and gave probably the best 10-minute talk on Australian history I've ever heard in my life. It was just a glorious jewel that he said. And I said to him, you really irritate me. I'm 20 years younger than you, and I have to get glasses out to introduce you, and you're 87 and you read everything without glasses. I said, you're a really irritating man. Just smiled benignly and gave me a kiss. So I'm going to do that irritating thing of having to put my glasses on. So if we look at the external supports that the child needs, and that in fact we all need to become, I'm making the assumption that everybody in this room is resilient, and that these factors, these 21 factors exist well and truly in us, because just looking around this room, you've grown up in a world that required much more independence and decision making, but it was a world that was safer in the sense that it had external structures that gave support, whether that was church or school or the law or whatever. And these institutions that have lost massive respect, some very deservedly, but very much the baby's been thrown out with the bathwater, I think. But these supports are all missing now, so people are left floundering much more than they were in a very fast-changing world, and constantly having to accommodate and manage, and they're finding it very hard, hence the massive amount of mental ill health. But if I now go back to the I have, so what does the child initially need, and what do young people need, adolescents need, if this hasn't happened to them at home before? Edith found that you only need one person, just one, whom you can trust and who actually remains trustworthy to help you, to enable you to develop resilience. Just one. So when I taught and when I was in schools, I used to say to teachers that if you choose to teach, then you have to see every person of inestimable value, irrespective of how they behave. Because you have to be an I have person for the child. Because I don't know what their parents are. I can't guarantee parents, but must be able to guarantee every teacher. Must. Because, and if you don't want to do that, well then don't teach. Because it is not a job. Teaching is not a job. Teaching without any equivocation is a vocation. It is the desire to help the other grow in a great variety of ways. Quite a few teachers in the room, is that so? I have tried, but you know, I think that they're a bit thick between the ears. Yes, I'm sorry if there are any in the room. So we have these external supports so that a person I can trust, whether within my family or without. And of course, when you're trustworthy with young people, you put limits around them so that they learn that you have to live in a community, in a society, and that has to have limits so that there's order, so that people can live together, so that they can have opportunity, so they can share and care. So those limits, those rules, limits and consequences, we live in a world where young people believe they are full of rights and they have no responsibilities. Well, excuse me, what, we chop one hand off, do we? We'll all become one-handed, do we? I tell them, I said, darling, get rid of a hand, you don't need it, you only want rights. I said, you only need one hand. The other hand's called responsibility. So the balance is lost, isn't it, often? And because of that, the young people learn to live within the confines of society, the rules, limits that allows that to happen. Equally important is it, of course, to encourage people, young people, to become independent. And that's one thing that parents seem to be at odds with today. Young people are not independent. They're overprotected, over-coddled. They're not allowed to do a whole lot of things that we were all allowed to do in case some evil person comes and lifts them out. If you look at most adolescents, nobody would want to kidnap an adolescent. No, you'd probably have to pay to have that. One of the things that adults that trustworthy people need to be role models. We need all to be role models, not only for our children and grandchildren, but for people we know, people we mix with, so that they see us as people of worth, who behave well, who are tolerant. I mean, you know, all this trouble we're having with refugee people and people of different races and different cultures. I mean, what nonsense is all this about? You know, which of those people is not human? We share humanity, and we look different. We have different clothes, different customs, different... So what? We can all live together if there's goodwill. And intolerance is really fear. We're frightened of something that looks different or behaves different. I've worked for many years, I was the Deputy Chair of Open Family Australia, and I've worked for over 30 years with street children and homeless children. And one of our offices was in Footscray, and there were a lot of Sudanese young people there, and there were about 8 or 9 of them, and I was talking with one day on the street corner, and they're all 7 feet tall, they're like lampposts. And we're chatting away, and it was getting dark, and I said, "No, you keep smiling so I can see you." And some person walked past me, and they said, "Oh, you're a so-and-so, such and such," and one of these tall beam things leant down, and he says, "Don't you talk about my mama like that." These young men, I was paying for them to attend TAFE, and they became water people, plumbers and all sorts of things. Lovely, beautiful, beautiful boys. Glorious, like statues, like I carved enemy statues. God, they're beautiful. Anyway, so it's very important that we are good role models, and that we not be bystanders when people around us say things that are wrong, that we know wrong. You know, we live in a world where you're not allowed to say right and wrong and good and bad. It's appropriate and inappropriate and acceptable and unacceptable. And you know, if you allow me to be terribly vulgar, if you pass wind, that's inappropriate, and if you murder somebody, it's inappropriate. Well, I would have thought there was a slight difference. So, you know, we've lost sanity. Is this the bell I'm not supposed to ring? School's out, playtime. And then, of course, you know, we talk about how young people are, how we access the goodies of the world, like health, education, and so on and so forth. And hopefully we can help young people to live in a stable, if not a stable family, then at least a stable community. Now, a person who has, say, such parents or such teachers, a young person, well, they get to be able to look at themselves a bit and see themselves as a reasonable sort of person, somebody, you know, I can be liked and I can be reasonable. And one of the things that we need to do for children, and in particular, mostly for adolescents and young adults, is to plan for the future, to have the ability to dream about what I might be. Do you know, if you can't dream, if you can't, as a young person, if you can't fantasize and dream about a future where you're successful or you can contribute in some way, it's a very bleak thing. You lock yourself down into these very narrow paths which are not desirable, not good. So, and of course, where does one's self-concept come from? Well, it comes obviously from respecting oneself and being able... And if you respect yourself, you respect others. It's not right that you know, I can't respect myself and then behave miserably to somebody else, because then I disrespect myself, do I not? Mm-hmm. So that self-respect is, and that's really what gives you a self-concept, a positive self-concept, that I'm a person of worth, and therefore I see the worth in the other. To have empathy, you know, the interesting thing is there are some studies that show that infants are born with empathy. That if you go into hospitals, which don't exist anymore, but where they used to have the baby wards, because, you know, I can remember when my son was born, thank God, he slept somewhere else and I could sleep. But now that's not allowed, because you've got to be, you know, driven mad and have to have the baby there all the time. And despite the fact you're going to have it for the next 40 or 50 years. You can't even get those 2 weeks to recover. They kick you out after 4 days anyway. So that they are born with empathy, and when infants cry in a nursery, they used to find that when they just cried because they cried, you'd just hear solitary crying. But if they heard an infant crying pain, all the other infants eventually started crying. With empathy for this. And these studies have been done everywhere. There's quite a lot of them. So and something that we can lose. It can be, deadened in us. And I from the work in the International Council of Psychology, we had to work with boy soldiers, and the empathy is killed in them because they have to become killing machines, and then so they don't feel. And what a tragedy that is, to not feel. That the young person learns that he or she is responsible for his behaviour, and that every behaviour is a choice and therefore carries a consequence. And that's a very difficult thing for young people to understand, that you choose how you behave and you invoke the conscience. I don't have to impose it, you've already invoked it. And then, of course, to have optimism. We live in a very pessimistic world, but we should live in Mr. Turnbull tells us that never before has time been so amazing. Well, maybe for some, but not for many. But nevertheless, optimism is important, and one of the ways we can help young people to be optimistic, and I see you all as having a major role in helping young people to grow into good people, because you've probably good people yourself by now. Optimism, to believe that things will turn out all right. And I think one of the ways that with teachers is that when you correct children, it should never be what I call the damnation. I'm always telling you to be quiet. You're always interrupting me. No, every behaviour should be treated as a one-off, so that the young person learns, and children learn, and I do this with the grandchildren, that yes, there is a consequence, and yes, this consequence will happen, but when that's over, it's all forgotten, we're back to normal and all's well, and I don't ever refer to it again. Even if I have to do it 50 times, I don't refer to it. So I don't do what I used to call at school with the nuns, the litany of the damned. So that's not useful. And I am optimistic that human beings have this great capacity to improve the world. And if we all work at it consistently and with persistence, we will win. And I firmly believe that. Now, because I've had all these external supports that my internal self is beginning to develop or has developed, I'm able to now apply all this into the world in which I live, so that I can think of ways to problem solve. Now, it's good to be able to think of new ways of solving problems. It's good to be able to think of other ways of solving problems. And that's really can become more and more important as the world becomes more and more complex. And young people will be required to move jobs and to move interests and maybe countries and so on, because of the way things change. So being open and being interested in that can improve young people's lives and indeed their resilience. To stay with task, well, persistence is a marvellous quality, is it not? And we live in a world of butterflies. Everybody flits, whether it's from Facebook to Twitter to SMSing to God knows what on their little screens that they all have. My granddaughter at 7 is better at it than I am. Mind you, that doesn't say a lot to me, but that's all right. To use humour, well, we all know that you can break up really difficult situations if you've got a sense of humour and you can see the funny side of it. And I certainly am of the view, I've never actually taken any young person very seriously because, without being terrible, in comparison with me, that young person is an idiot. So, ipso facto, all young people are idiots in comparison with us. Because the amount of knowledge we have, the amount of experience we have, the number of skills we have are times 1,000 what this young person has. And though this young person may be clever, they're still a long way away. So when they misbehave and do silly things and are ridiculous, if you take that so terribly seriously, it's not really necessary. If you can see it with a touch of humour and with a certain amount of mild cynicism about it all, you're much more helpful to them and much less likely to get annoyed and irritated by them. So, to learn to be able to express yourself, preferably not just on an iPad or an iPhone, but actually with words, out of mouths. I see young kids and the young people. I was at an engagement party, one of my godchildren, and they're all there. There's 150 of them, and most of the time they have their heads down and they're doing this. I wonder if you can get RSI in your thumbs. Can you? Well, I reckon they've all got it. To learn to solve problems in various settings, to be able to solve problems personally in the workplace. Career resilience is going to become very important, to be able to work out how to resolve a problem is going to become quite difficult in all these settings. And also, of course, to learn to manage one's own behaviour, your impulses, your feelings, not to give way to instant irritation or instant annoyance or whatever, just to hold that in and to ask yourself, is that what you really want to do? I tell children that they've got 10 seconds, if they're angry or they're upset, they've got 10 seconds to say stop, and then when they've said stop, to say think, and then to ask themselves, what do I want to do? Do I want to let this feeling fly, or do I want to control it? And you can teach, I have little children who have quite serious sort of temper tantrums, and I tell them that their belly button is magic. And I said, if you press your belly button and you say stop, it'll stop. Well, of course it does, because you've distracted yourself, but of course I'm not going to tell them that little gem. And they do it, and so there are kids now in kindergartens all over Melbourne pulling up their shirts and pressing their belly buttons. So, but how simple is that? And what does the child learn? I can control myself. What is the only discipline that's worth a pinch of, the proverbial self-discipline? How does it start? Like this. Like this. And then, because I trust, I will reach out for help when I need it, because I have people I can trust who will help me if I can't problem solve for myself. So this model, this resilience model, is not 1, 2, 3, but it's cyclical. We're good at some things sometimes and not as good at other things at other times, and we improve. I have to say that in the 25 years that I've been involved in this, and without being ridiculous, I have improved greatly as a human being, because I've looked much more deeply at myself and at my behaviours and at my responses, and I've asked myself, is this really in the best interest, not only of me as self-respecting, but in my relationships with others? And I can honestly tell you, it massively improved my ability to relate with anybody and everybody. So it's a model that works, it's proven, it's evidence-based, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in America, whether it's in Australia, it works. And it's really well worth considering. In the schools where I've managed to introduce this as a whole school policy, they have really flourished out of it, because the school has taken it on very seriously and the parents have been involved in it, because you can't separate the child from just at school from the parents. So the home and the school, particularly when they work together, then we can produce very, very interesting young people. But this is I use this a lot with parents, with young parents, to help them to look at themselves. And, one of the interesting things you often hear from young parents is they say with their child, particularly if the children are little, they say, my child knows how to press my buttons, which makes me smile very politely, because, as we all know, there are no buttons. We choose to allow ourselves to become annoyed or angry, and we choose how we respond. Nobody makes us do anything. Even if I put a gun to your head, you still have a choice. You can say, shoot me. It's not very sensible, but still. So it's really choice, and when we say to the children that their behaviour is a choice and carries a consequence, we mustn't forget that our behaviour is a choice and carries a consequence. And we need to make sure that as trustworthy, resilient, competent adults, we model competent behaviour. Thank you very much.